The ink was still drying when Ryan Whitaker laughed at his wife's future. He did not laugh quietly or nervously. He laughed like a man who believed he had just amputated a weakness and saved himself. On the 42nd floor of a glass tower in San Francisco's financial district with the skyline smeared by rain and ambition, he raised a crystal tumbler of 18-year scotch and admired the reflection of his own success. The divorce papers lay open on the marble desk between him and Claire, thin sheets of paper that he believed separated him from mediocrity and propelled him toward greatness. The office smelled of polished leather and expensive cologne, the kind of scent curated for boardrooms and power lunches. Ryan sat behind a slab of imported stone that cost more than the first car he had ever owned, scrolling through projected merger numbers on his tablet as if she were a meeting he needed to end. Claire stood near the credenza, clutching a canvas tote bag that looked painfully out of place against the skyline of venture capital dreams. She wore a beige sweater and simple jeans, no designer logos, no glittering jewelry, just the plainness he had grown to resent. "The papers are signed," Ryan said, without looking up, his voice smooth and dismissive. "All you have to do is add your name, and this chapter closes." He finally lifted his gaze, cool blue eyes scanning her like an asset being written off. "You'll get the apartment in Oakland, and the Honda. It's more than fair considering what you brought into this marriage." The cruelty was casual, sharpened by pride. He had rewritten their history into a ledger, and in his version, she had always been a liability. Claire stepped forward slowly, each movement measured, controlled. There was no trembling in her hands, no visible anger in her expression. The storm outside beat against the glass, but inside the room, the air felt frozen. "I worked 2 jobs when you were building your prototype," she said softly. "I paid for your first suit when no investor would return your calls." Her tone was not pleading. It was factual, almost distant, as though she were narrating someone else's story. "And I repaid you." Ryan snapped the thin crack in his composure, flashing for only a second. "I cleared your loans. I gave you a better life." He gestured toward the city below, toward the bridges and the cranes and the towers stabbing into gray sky. "But let's be honest, Claire. You don't fit here anymore. I'm merging with Mercer Capital next month. I'll be hosting galas, attending fundraisers. I can't have a wife who looks like she shops in clearance bins standing beside me." He did not say Madison's name, but it hovered in the room like perfume. Claire studied him carefully, searching for the man she once believed in. 5 years ago, Ryan had been driven but kind, ambitious but human. Now ambition had devoured everything softer inside him. "You've always been invisible," he continued, swirling his drink, savoring the burn. "You never understood the game." He mistook her silence for defeat, her composure for smallness. He believed invisibility meant insignificance. She uncapped the pen and hesitated not out of doubt, but out of final recognition. The marriage had not failed in this moment. It had unraveled slowly under the weight of his ego. She signed her name deliberately, Claire Hartwell, not Whitaker. Hartwell. The scratch of ink against paper sounded louder than the rain. Ryan barely glanced at it, too consumed by the thrill of being unburdened. He snatched the document back and scanned it, satisfied. "My attorney will transfer the settlement within 48 hours, he said. "Try not to waste it." He turned toward the window, lifting his glass in a silent toast to his own reflection. "To freedom," he murmured. "To upgrading." He believed he had just shed dead weight, cleared space for a brighter future with sharper company and louder applause. Claire removed her wedding ring and placed it gently on the desk. The small metallic sound echoed through the room with unsettling finality. She looked at him one last time, not with anger, not even with heartbreak, but with something far more dangerous clarity. For 5 years, she had hidden behind simplicity testing whether love could exist without the gravity of legacy. He had never asked about her family, never questioned the absence of photographs, never wondered why a woman so steady carried herself with quiet confidence. As she walked toward the door, the storm outside began to soften, the rain thinning into mist. Ryan did not watch her leave. He was already imagining headlines, Champagne Madison's hand in his, the applause of a world he believed he deserved. He thought he had just cut loose an anchor. He did not realize he had just signed away the only person powerful enough to keep him from drowning. Claire stepped out of the glass tower and into the cold breath of the city, and the rain did not feel like punishment, but like release. The storm that had battered the skyline minutes earlier now fell in steady silver lines, soaking her sweater, flattening her hair against her cheeks, washing away the last fragile illusion of the life she had just signed away. She did not open an umbrella. She did not rush for cover. For 5 years, she had performed the role of the supportive, invisible wife. Now, with each drop of rain, that costume dissolved. Behind her, 42 floors above ground, Ryan Whitaker was still toasting his freedom, unaware that the ground beneath him had already begun to shift. Traffic hissed along Market Street tires, slicing through puddles' headlights, reflecting in fractured gold across wet asphalt. Pedestrians hurried past, her collars, turned-up phones clutched tightly. Each one too absorbed in their own urgency to notice the woman standing perfectly still at the curb. To them, she was ordinary, another figure swallowed by the financial district's relentless rhythm. But Claire's stillness was not weakness. It was calculation. She closed her eyes briefly and exhaled as if sealing a contract not written on paper, but etched into memory. The test was over. The answer had been delivered. A low, purring engine cut through the rain, smooth and deliberate. A black Bentley flying spur eased toward the curb, its polished surface reflecting the city lights like liquid obsidian. Even in San Francisco, where wealth rolled casually down steep hills, the car drew glances. The rear door opened before the vehicle fully stopped, and a tall man in his early 60s stepped out, umbrella in hand, posture, rigid with quiet authority. His suit was charcoal impeccably tailored, the kind of fabric that did not wrinkle under pressure. His name was Charles Pendleton, and he had spent decades ensuring that the Hartwell legacy remained untouched by storms far worse than rain. "Miss Hartwell," he said, gently correcting himself before the former surname could settle. His voice carried respect, not pity. He held the umbrella over her head, shielding her completely as though the elements themselves had no right to touch her without permission. "The board has been notified. The signature has triggered the release clause. The trust is fully accessible." There was no triumph in his tone, only confirmation. Systems long prepared had just been activated. Claire met his gaze, and for a moment the softness Ryan had mistaken for fragility was gone. In its place was composure sharpened by lineage. "And my grandmother?" she asked quietly. Charles allowed the faintest smile. Restless as always, she believed he would not pass the test. Claire did not react outwardly, but something in her eyes flickered not with pain, but with final acceptance. The test had not been about wealth. It had been about character. They stepped into the car, the interior warm and scented faintly with cedar and jasmine. As the door closed, the noise of the city dimmed to a distant hum. Screens embedded discreetly into the console flickered to life, displaying financial dashboards and pending acquisitions. Charles turned slightly in his seat. "There is more," he said. "Mr. Whitaker's firm is dangerously leveraged. His anticipated merger with Mercer Capital is masking significant liabilities. We completed the audit you requested 6 months ago. The findings are extensive." Claire looked out through the tinted window as the Bentley merged smoothly into traffic, leaving the tower behind. She could still see the building in the distance, a monument to Ryan's ego rising above the district. "He believes he is a shark," she murmured. "But he is swimming in waters he does not understand." Her voice held no malice, only clarity. The rain streaked across the glass like lines drawn through an outdated chapter. "Shall we initiate the acquisition through Astera Holdings?" Charles asked. It was a simple question that carried the weight of empires. Claire leaned back against the leather seat, feeling the shift inside her settle into place. "Not yet," she said calmly. "Let him celebrate. Let him think he has won. The higher the illusion, the deeper the fall." The Bentley turned toward the bridge city lights fading behind them, and for the first time that night Claire allowed herself the smallest, most dangerous smile. True power did not shout in glass towers. It waited in silence, then moved. By the time the Bentley crossed the Bay Bridge, the storm had dissolved into a thin veil of mist, and the city behind them looked less like a battlefield and more like a chessboard waiting for the next move. Claire Hartwell did not look back. She had learned long ago that power wasted on nostalgia became weakness. Inside the quiet cocoon of the car, screens glowed with numbers that would have made most executives dizzy. Asset portfolios, maritime shares, rare earth holdings, sovereign bonds, and layered trust structures that stretched across continents. The Hartwell-Kavanaugh Trust was not a fortune that fit into headlines. It was an ecosystem. And tonight, one dormant branch had just awakened. Charles Pendleton adjusted his glasses and tapped lightly on the tablet resting against his knee. "Astera Holdings is prepared to move," he said. "The shell structure is clean. Zurich registration finalized. Singapore subsidiary operational. We can begin discrete accumulation of Whitaker and Company's outstanding debt within 72 hours. His tone was precise, professional, yet beneath it lay something almost protective. He had watched Claire grow from a quiet child into a woman trained to manage influence measured in trillions. He knew what this moment meant. Claire studied the scrolling figures without visible emotion. 6 months earlier, while Ryan had been rehearsing speeches about disruption and innovation, she had quietly commissioned a forensic audit of his company. The results had not surprised her. Leveraged credit lines stacked on optimistic projections, deferred losses buried in subsidiaries, pension allocations redirected to cover short-term liquidity gaps. He had built momentum, yes, but on unstable ground. He believed the upcoming merger with Mercer Capital would sanitize everything. He believed image could outrun arithmetic. "He thinks the merger will save him," Charles continued. "Mercer's due diligence team has not uncovered the deeper irregularities yet. If we move now, we can position Astera as a white knight investor." The phrase hung in the air, deceptively noble. Claire allowed a faint smile. "White knight," she repeated softly. "No. We are not rescuing him. We are acquiring leverage." She leaned back, folding her hands in her lap, her reflection faint in the tinted window. For 5 years she had minimized herself, worn muted colors, clipped coupons, listened to Ryan talk about valuations and branding as if those words defined reality. She had wanted to know whether he would value her without the gravity of her surname. Her grandfather had insisted on the experiment. Wealth, he had told her, was not a test of intelligence. It was a test of character. And character revealed itself most clearly when it believed no one powerful was watching. "Proceed with phase 1, she said at last. "Quiet accumulation, no public signals. Let him finalize the divorce. Let him celebrate with Madison. Let him announce his grand future." Her voice did not tremble. It did not rise. It carried the steady cadence of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "When he believes he is untouchable, we step forward." Charles nodded once. "Understood." He paused, then added carefully, "You are certain you want to handle the final negotiation personally?" Claire's gaze shifted from the city lights to her own reflection. The softness Ryan had dismissed was gone, replaced by composure forged in boardrooms she had entered long before she ever met him. "He always underestimated me," she said quietly. It seems only fair that I deliver the correction myself. The Bentley exited the highway and disappeared into the private entrance of a waterfront penthouse owned not by Claire Whitaker, but by Claire Hartwell. Above the bay lights flickered on one by one as night settled fully over the city. Somewhere downtown, Ryan was likely raising another glass, confident that he had severed the only tie holding him back. He did not know that the tie he had cut was not a rope but a safety line, and the net beneath him had just been removed. 3 weeks later, Ryan Whitaker felt invincible. The divorce had finalized with impressive speed, his attorneys efficient and merciless, and the narrative circulating through financial blogs painted him as a visionary unburdened by domestic distraction. He had moved into a penthouse suite overlooking the bay while renovations began on a new bachelor apartment in Pacific Heights and Madison. Blake had wasted no time settling into the rhythm of his ascent. She looked perfect beside him at rooftop dinners and investor lunches, all sharp angles and confident laughter, her presence engineered for photographs. Ryan mistook visibility for validation, applause for loyalty. That evening, they dined in a private room at a Michelin-starred restaurant in Nob Hill, the kind of place where waiters spoke softly and wine lists required translation. Candlelight flickered across Madison's diamond earrings as she leaned forward, eyes bright with excitement. "To the Mercer merger," she said, clinking her glass against his. "And to Astera Holdings, your mysterious new backers." Her voice carried admiration tinged with calculation. She understood momentum. She understood proximity to power. Ryan smiled, savoring both the champagne and the narrative forming around him. "They approached us," he said casually, though pride swelled in his chest. "Zurich-based private equity discreet elite. They've been watching my trajectory for years." The words felt good in his mouth. Watching my trajectory. He liked imagining unseen billionaires tracking his rise like analysts studying a comet. He did not question why a firm so secretive would move so quickly, nor why they requested a personal meeting rather than sending junior associates. Madison tilted her head. "I've never heard of them." There was the faintest crease between her brows, quickly smoothed away. Ryan waved a dismissive hand. "That's the point. Real money doesn't advertise." He enjoyed sounding worldly, initiated into a club she could only glimpse. The Mercer deal would inject prestige. Astera would inject capital. Together, they would catapult Whitaker and company into global relevance. He saw headlines panels at Davos interviews under stage lights. His phone buzzed against the linen tablecloth. An unknown number. He hesitated only a second before answering. "Whitaker," he said smoothly. The voice on the other end was calm, measured, almost metallic in its clarity. "Mr. Whitaker, this is a courtesy confirmation regarding your meeting tomorrow at 10 in the morning with Astera Holdings. The chief executive officer will attend personally." Ryan's pulse quickened. "The chief executive," he repeated, pleased. "I appreciate the respect." There was a pause, subtle but deliberate. "The chief executive is a woman. Mr. Whitaker," the voice continued. "She prefers punctuality and preparation. Wear the blue tie from your wedding photographs." The line went silent before Ryan could respond. He stared at the phone, unsettled for a fraction of a second before laughter returned to his throat. Madison raised an eyebrow. "Fashion advice from a billionaire," she teased. Ryan shrugged. "Power play. They like to remind you who's writing the check." But beneath his amusement flickered something he refused to name. The specificity unsettled him. How would they know about the tie? How would they have seen wedding photographs that Claire had insisted remain private? He pushed the thought aside. Investors conducted research. That was normal. Thoroughness meant interest. Interest meant leverage in his favor. He convinced himself of this as he signed the dinner bill without glancing at the total. Later that night, standing on the balcony of the penthouse, Ryan watched the city lights glitter across the water. Madison rested her head against his shoulder, already speaking of Aspen chalets and charity galas. He imagined himself on stage, applauded for resilience, admired for reinvention. Tomorrow's meeting would seal everything. Astera would validate him at the highest level. He did not know that validation and evaluation are often twins wearing different masks. Across the bay, in a waterfront penthouse illuminated by quiet intelligence rather than spectacle, Claire Hartwell reviewed the final briefing from Charles Pendleton. The accumulation phase was complete, the leverage secured. She closed the file with steady hands. Tomorrow, Ryan would walk into a room expecting admiration. Instead, he would meet arithmetic. And arithmetic, unlike applause, never lies. Ryan arrived at the Four Seasons conference suite 10 minutes early, dressed in a charcoal suit and a deep red tie instead of the blue one suggested on the phone. He had considered the request for less than a second before dismissing it. No investor dictated what he wore. The room overlooked the city through wide panes of glass sunlight, reflecting off the bay in fractured shards of silver. A long walnut table dominated the center, immaculate and imposing. This was his stage. He intended to command it. Only one man stood inside when he entered. Charles Pendleton, though Ryan did not yet know his name, turned from the window with unhurried composure. He looked like old money distilled into human form, hair silvered neatly at the temples, posture, disciplined eyes calm in a way that suggested he had witnessed crises far larger than corporate negotiations. "Mr. Whitaker," he said, smoothly. "Please sit." Ryan checked his watch, irritation pricking his confidence. "I'm here to meet the chief executive of Astera Holdings," he replied. "I assume she is running late." "She is precisely on time," Charles answered. "Her aircraft encountered minor headwinds departing Monaco. She will join us shortly. I am Charles Pendleton, liaison to Astera." The mention of Monaco flickered across Ryan's mind like a warning flare. He masked it with a tight smile and took his seat. "Let's discuss numbers," he said briskly. "I'm seeking $50 million for 10% equity. Strategic partnership. Non-negotiable." He leaned back, projecting certainty, unaware that certainty built on assumption is merely theater. Charles folded his hands on the table and regarded him steadily. "Astera is prepared to offer $100 million, he said. Ryan's eyebrows lifted despite himself. For what percentage, he asked, already calculating expansion plans. 51%, Charles replied without hesitation. The words landed with the weight of stone. Ryan laughed, sharp and dismissive. "You're joking. I'm not selling control of my company. This is growth capital, not surrender." "It is neither," Charles said quietly. "It is stabilization." He slid a thick dossier across the polished surface of the table. Ryan opened it with impatience that quickly curdled into something colder. Inside were photocopies of internal ledgers, deferred losses mapped clearly offshore. Transfers highlighted in red, pension reallocations annotated with timestamps. Documents he had believed buried beneath complexity were laid bare with surgical precision. His mouth dried. "Where did you get this?" he demanded, voice losing its practiced smoothness. "Astera conducts thorough evaluations," Charles answered. "You are insolvent, Mr. Whitaker. Your projected merger with Mercer Capital is built on financial statements that would not withstand deeper scrutiny. Should these findings reach regulators, the consequences would be severe." The room seemed to shrink. Ryan felt the air thin around him. For the first time since the divorce, he sensed something he could not charm or intimidate: exposure. The door opened with controlled finality. Ryan turned annoyance ready on his tongue and froze. Claire stepped inside, wearing a tailored ivory suit that seemed cut from light itself. Her hair fell in dark, deliberate waves, and the simplicity he had once mocked had been replaced by elegance, so understated it commanded silence. She did not hurry. She did not glance around uncertainly. She walked to the head of the table and sat folding her hands as though she had always belonged there. "Hello, Ryan?" she said, her voice calm and resonant. The familiarity struck him like a physical blow. "Claire." He whispered, confusion cracking through his composure. "What are you doing here?" She met his gaze without flinching. "I am the Chief Executive Officer of Astera Holdings," she replied evenly. "And as of this morning, through strategic acquisition of your outstanding debt, I own controlling interest in Whitaker and Company." The silence that followed was not empty. It was decisive. Ryan stared at her, disbelief battling recognition. The woman he had dismissed as invisible now sat at the axis of his survival. His mind raced through memories, small details he had ignored: her composure during crises, her questions about balance sheets, her refusal to be impressed by superficial success. They rearranged themselves into a pattern he had never bothered to see. "You lied to me," he managed, voice hollow. Claire's expression did not harden. It clarified. "No," she said softly. "I allowed you to reveal yourself." Ryan's pulse pounded so loudly he could barely hear the faint hum of the city beyond the glass walls. Claire sat at the head of the table as though she had always occupied that seat, as though the last 5 years had merely been an intermission in a much larger performance. The softness he once interpreted as naivety was gone. In its place stood composure shaped by inheritance and discipline. Charles remained silent at her side, a witness rather than a participant. Ryan's world, which had felt expansive only hours earlier, now narrowed to the polished wood between them and the weight of the dossier under his trembling hands. "My father was Victor Hartwell," Claire said calmly, her gaze steady. "My mother was Lillian Kavanaugh. You never asked about them, not once. You assumed the absence of photographs meant absence of significance." Each word fell gently, but none were accidental. Ryan's mind raced, assembling fragments he had dismissed: the occasional international call she took in private, the effortless way she navigated complex financial discussions, the confidence beneath her quietness. The Hartwell-Kavanaugh Trust manages diversified holdings across shipping technology, infrastructure, rare earth resources, and sovereign investments, she continued. Your company's core banking software licenses portions of systems we partially own. Ryan felt heat rise to his face. So this was a game he demanded, desperation sharpening his tone. You were pretending to be small while sitting on billions. Claire did not flinch. Trillions, Charles corrected quietly. The correction did not sound boastful. It sounded factual. Ryan's breath caught in his throat. The scale of it stretched beyond comprehension, beyond ego, beyond everything he had measured himself against. I did not pretend, Claire said evenly. I simplified. I wanted to know if you could love without leverage. For a fleeting second, something like regret flickered behind her eyes, but it vanished as quickly as it appeared. Instead, you reduced our marriage to optics and dismissed me when I no longer fit your narrative. She slid a bound document across the table, its cover embossed discreetly with Astera's insignia. This is the restructuring agreement. Ryan stared at the document as if it were a verdict. Claire's voice remained measured, almost instructional. Astera Holdings will acquire 51% controlling interest in Whitaker and Company. We will inject $100 million to stabilize your debt obligations and secure compliance before regulators uncover the discrepancies. She paused, allowing the implication to settle. You will retain the title of Chief Executive Officer. The market trusts your face. However, you will hold no voting power. Any expenditure exceeding $5,000 requires counter-signature from Charles Pendleton. The humiliation burned deeper than the threat of exposure. You're turning me into a puppet, Ryan whispered, anger and disbelief colliding inside him. Claire leaned forward slightly, her voice dropping but not wavering. I am preventing you from becoming an inmate. If I walk away, this dossier reaches federal authorities within hours. The Mercer merger collapses. Your investors sue. Your reputation dissolves. She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. The arithmetic was sufficient. And my compensation? He asked, hoarsely, clinging to fragments of control. Claire's lips curved faintly, not in cruelty, but in inevitability. Your salary will be $1 per year. All dividends attributable to your remaining shares will service the debt created by this bailout. Performance determines survival. The sentence hung between them like a blade suspended by thread. Ryan realized that the empire he thought he commanded had already shifted beneath his feet. Silence thickened the room. Pride battled instinct. He imagined headlines exposing fraud, imagined Madison's admiration curdling into disgust, imagined board members turning away. He had always believed himself to be the architect of his destiny. Now he saw that he had miscalculated the foundation. Slowly, with fingers that felt foreign to his own body, he reached for the pen resting beside the agreement. "Sign here," Claire said quietly, indicating the final page. He hesitated only a heartbeat before pressing ink to paper. The motion felt heavier than the divorce signature he had celebrated weeks earlier. As he finished, Claire collected the document with composed efficiency. "You will attend the Mercer Gala this Saturday," she added. "You will be composed. You will be sober. You will represent the company appropriately." Her gaze sharpened. "Bring Madison." Ryan looked up, dread pooling beneath his ribs. "Claire?" He began, unsure what he intended to ask. She rose from her seat, smoothing the sleeve of her jacket. "I do not create scenes," she said calmly. "I orchestrate outcomes." Then she turned and walked out of the room, leaving Ryan seated in the aftermath of a truth he had never imagined. The Mercer Capitol Gala unfolded beneath crystal chandeliers in the grand ballroom of the Palace Hotel, where wealth moved like perfume and reputations were measured in glances. Cameras flashed at the entrance. Reporters murmured predictions about the merger, and the city's elite floated across marble floors with glasses of champagne balanced between manicured fingers. Ryan Whitaker stood near an ice sculpture shaped like a rising phoenix, a symbol he would have once claimed for himself. Tonight, however, he held a glass of sparkling water instead of whiskey. Charles had called that afternoon with a simple instruction: a sober chief executive officer was non-negotiable. Even celebration, it seemed, required permission. Madison Blake shimmered beside him in a vivid gold gown cut daringly low, her confidence fueled by proximity to what she believed was untouchable power. She scanned the room for photographers, adjusting her posture whenever a lens drifted their direction. "This is our night," she whispered, squeezing his arm. "Mercer signs. Astera funds. You dominate the market." Her certainty echoed the version of reality Ryan had once sold so convincingly. But beneath his tailored suit, anxiety coiled tightly. He knew now that dominance was an illusion curated by those who controlled the narrative. The atmosphere shifted before anyone announced her arrival. Conversation softened not into silence, but into reverence. Heads turned toward the staircase descending from the mezzanine. Gavin Mercer himself broke away from a circle of senators and venture capitalists, his posture transforming from host to subordinate. At the top of the steps stood Claire Hartwell. She wore a midnight blue gown, understated yet commanding the fabric catching light without begging for it. A single sapphire pendant rested at her throat, luminous and deliberate. She descended alone. Each step was unhurried, precise, as though the ballroom existed solely to frame her movement. Ryan felt his throat constrict. Madison leaned forward, confusion flickering across her expression. "Is that Claire?" she whispered incredulously. "Your ex." The word sounded inadequate, almost foolish. Ryan did not answer. He watched Gavin Mercer extend his hand with visible respect, heard him greet her not as a guest but as a partner. Ms. Hartwell Mercer said warmly, "We are honored you could attend in person." Claire's smile was composed almost serene. "Significant investments warrant direct oversight," she replied. The statement rippled through nearby circles. Astera Holdings was no longer a mystery whispered among analysts. It had a face, and that face was the woman Ryan had dismissed as invisible. As she moved through the crowd, space opened naturally before her, not out of intimidation, but acknowledgement. Authority radiated quietly from her presence. When Claire approached Ryan and Madison, the contrast felt theatrical. Up close, her gaze was clear and surgical. She examined Madison's gown, the heavy makeup, the calculated bravado, not with jealousy, but assessment. "You must be Madison," she said evenly. Madison straightened, forcing a smile. "Vice President of Marketing," she replied brightly. "And Ryan's partner." The word partner trembled with ambition. Claire inclined her head slightly. How efficient, she observed. However, under the restructuring agreement signed this week, executive conduct and public association fall under Astera's brand governance clause. Madison blinked confusion, cracking her composure. Ryan felt the blood drain from his face. Claire's tone did not rise yet. Each syllable carried authority sharpened by preparation. "Your position," she continued calmly, "was reviewed this morning. Redundancies have been eliminated. Your employment concluded at 5 in the afternoon. The humiliation spread like wildfire. Conversations paused. Phones lifted subtly. Madison's smile shattered into disbelief. "You can't fire me," she snapped, turning to Ryan for support. He could not meet her eyes. The truth had stripped him of the very power she relied upon. "Actually," Claire corrected softly, "I can." Gavin Mercer signaled discreetly, and security stepped closer, polite but firm. Madison's expression hardened into disgust. "You said you were in control," she hissed at Ryan. "You said you ran everything." The words struck deeper than Claire's verdict. Without waiting for assistance, Madison turned and strode toward the exit, her gold gown trailing like a warning flare. Ryan remained rooted to the marble floor, exposed beneath chandeliers that suddenly felt merciless. Claire regarded him with measured calm. "Return to the office at 8 on Monday morning," she said. "Read the employee handbook." Then she turned away, accepting Mercer's arm as applause rose for the official merger announcement. The clapping was not for Ryan. It was for stability, for decisive leadership, for the quiet force that had stepped from the shadows. As he walked toward the ballroom doors alone, Ryan understood that public humiliation was not the sharpest punishment. The sharpest punishment was relevance revoked. The weeks after the gala did not erupt in scandal. They eroded in silence. Ryan Whitaker arrived at the office each morning at 8 sharp, no longer ascending to the executive floor, but stopping 3 levels below where his new office faced a brick wall instead of the bay. His name remained on the website. His title remained on press releases. But authority had evaporated. Expense requests required counter-signatures. Strategic decisions required review. He sat through meetings led by people who once waited outside his door. The humiliation was methodical, almost polite, and beneath it resentment began to ferment. Madison vanished from his life within 48 hours of her dismissal. Her number blocked his calls. Photos of them disappeared from social media as if curated by an invisible hand. Ryan told himself he did not care. What he cared about was the algorithm. Sentinel, the core banking infrastructure his engineers had designed, was still his creation. He knew its architecture intimately, knew the deep subroutines few others fully understood. If he could not own the company, he could cripple its value. The thought arrived quietly, then rooted itself with dangerous persistence. Late at night, long after most employees had left, Ryan remained at his desk under fluorescent light. He told Charles he was optimizing legacy code to improve scalability. In truth, he was embedding a logic bomb within Sentinel's expansion protocols, a subtle trigger that would activate once user growth surpassed 10 million accounts. The crash would appear random, catastrophic, irreparable. Investors would panic. Stock would plummet. In chaos, leverage shifted. He convinced himself it was justice. He convinced himself he was reclaiming control. On a rain-streaked Tuesday evening, he completed the final lines. His finger hovered above the Enter key heart, hammering with reckless resolve. He pressed it. The screen went black instantly. A red padlock icon appeared at the center, stark and unblinking. His office phone rang before he could process what he was seeing. The sound sliced through the room. He answered with shaking hands. A distorted male voice responded calmly. "Did you truly believe we would not monitor keystrokes on a secured financial network?" The line disconnected. The door burst open. Not security guards, but federal agents stepped inside, badges displayed without theatrics. Behind them stood Charles Pendleton, his expression neither triumphant nor angry, merely disappointed. "Ryan Whitaker," one agent said evenly, "you are under arrest for attempted corporate sabotage involving federally regulated financial infrastructure." The words echoed in the small office heavier than any boardroom accusation. Ryan's protests sounded hollow even to his own ears. He was handcuffed before he could assemble denial into coherence. 6 months later, the skyline had been replaced by chain-link fencing crowned with razor wire at a federal correctional facility in California. Ryan's tailored suits had been exchanged for a beige uniform 2 sizes too large. His hands, once accustomed to crystal tumblers and polished wood, were cracked from institutional laundry work. Time moved differently inside concrete walls. It did not race. It accumulated. Pride dissolved slowly, replaced by something quieter and more punishing awareness. When the guard announced a legal visit, hope flared in his chest with desperate intensity. Perhaps an appeal. Perhaps negotiation. He shuffled into the visitation room, shackles clinking softly, and sat behind thick glass. Claire Hartwell took the seat opposite him. She wore a simple cream coat, nothing ostentatious, yet she radiated the same controlled authority he had witnessed at the gala. Her eyes were clear, neither cruel nor tender. Just certain. "I wanted you to hear this from me," she said through the receiver. From her bag, she removed a copy of their prenuptial agreement. Ryan recognized the document, instantly remembered the day he had insisted she sign to protect his modest assets. "You never read the addendum my grandfather required?" Claire continued calmly. She pointed to a clause detailing a loyalty provision. Had he remained married for 7 years with fidelity and support during hardship, he would have been entitled to 50% of non-vested trust dividends upon the 10th anniversary. He stared at her comprehension dawning with brutal clarity. How much, he whispered. Claire did not dramatize the answer. Last year's dividends alone were approximately $400 million, she said. In 2 more years you would have held access to nearly $500 million. The figure hung between them not as temptation, but as indictment. All he had needed to do was remain kind. All he had needed to do was value what he already possessed. Tears blurred his vision. "Why tell me now?" he asked hoarsely. Claire stood smoothing her coat. "Because you always measured life by what you believed you were owed," she replied. "Now you understand the cost of arrogance." She did not offer rescue. She did not offer forgiveness. She offered truth. Then she turned and walked out the door, closing with soft finality. Outside, sunlight replaced the morning fog. A black Bentley waited at the curb. Charles opened the door and Claire stepped inside without looking back. As the car pulled away, market alerts flashed across her phone. Astera's valuation had reached an all-time high. Whitaker and Company, restructured and stabilized, thrived without the volatility that once defined it. In the rearview mirror, the prison receded into distance. Ryan remained behind concrete and wire, left with the echo of a lesson he had learned too late. He had chased spectacle and dismissed substance, mistaken quiet strength for insignificance. He believed himself the architect of destiny, yet he had failed the simplest test of character. True wealth had stood beside him for 5 years, asking only to be respected, and he had signed it away. From a psychological and financial perspective, Ryan's downfall was never about money. It was about perception. High achievers often confuse visibility with value and influence with control. But true power, the kind that sustains over decades, is built on character restraint and the ability to recognize worth before it is proven in numbers. Claire did not win because she was wealthier. She won because she understood leverage timing and, most importantly, human nature. Ryan's greatest mistake was not signing the divorce papers. It was underestimating the quiet strength standing beside him. In life and in business, arrogance compounds faster than interest, and humility is often the most profitable investment. If this story made you think, take a moment to like and subscribe so you never miss another lesson wrapped in drama and truth. And before you go, comment just 2 words: true wealth.